With the government on the edge of a majority after last week's surprise floor crossing, the Prime Minister suggests there is still a spectrum of MPs enticed by his brand of governing. Mark Carney sat down for a year-end interview with the CBC News chief political correspondent Rosemary Barton today. And Rosie joins me now with more on that one-on-one. Okay. A big topic of conversation ever since Michael Moss surprised the country. What more did the Prime Minister have to say about the possibility of even more floor crossers?
Yeah, I mean, this was our first opportunity to ask him questions about sort of how this came to be and whether there are other people, as some of his own ministers have claimed, and how he responds to Pierre Poilievre's claims that this is not the way you get your majority, right? Pierre Poilievre saying you need to do that through votes, not through what he calls dirty backroom deals. Right. The Prime Minister made it clear that he believes there is, as you said off the top there, a spectrum of MPs, a variety of MPs who are at this moment in time questioning the best approach to governing the country. He talked about how there are people who don't believe that slogans are the best way forward, that do believe that actions are the best way forward. So I did ask him about those comments by Pierre Poilievre and whether he would be okay getting a majority just through other people suddenly crossing the aisle and becoming part of his caucus. And here's a little bit of what he told me. When I spoke to Pierre Poilievre recently, his message to you was that if you want a majority, you have to go back to the Canadian people to get it and not do it, by his words, dirty backroom deals. Are you comfortable getting a majority by people crossing the floor?
Well, we're in a parliament, and when we pass legislation, we need more people voting for it than against it. I mean, that's the way. Last time I checked, that's the way Parliament works.
Right, but that's not what you're doing now. Now you're attracting MPs to the party.
MPs are attracted to what we're doing.
So there's no active recruitment happening?
Premiers are attracted to what we're doing. Right. Premier Ford will be here tomorrow. We'll make a major announcement of cooperation. The Conservative Premier of Ontario.
I want to go back to what my question was, which was, are you comfortable getting a majority government through people crossing the floor?
I am comfortable commanding the confidence of the House of Commons and getting through the House of Commons, getting support in the House of Commons and votes, obviously votes and support in the House of Commons for legislation that is going to protect Canadian communities, that's going to build this country, is going to make our country more independent, more sustainable, more prosperous.
Are there So to be fair to the Prime Minister, he is right that ultimately this is about commanding the confidence of the House.
Right.
And if you're doing it through votes and confidence measures, or if you're doing it through people coming across the floor because you're either recruiting them or they are attracted to what you're saying, that's all fair ball. I did ask him what would change if you had your majority. You're doing things at a very intense speed and pressure in a critical moment for the country, and he didn't really bite on that because he does believe that he is cooperating across the aisle, working with other parties to get things done. So whether a majority would fundamentally change that for him or not, unclear. Also surprising to me that there was no. That at least for him, there doesn't seem to be an active recruiting team out there trying to get other MPs to cross the floor, in spite of the things that we may have heard.
Yeah, the Conservatives have been pushing back, saying that the Liberals are pitching this, when really, to use a sports metaphor, the Liberals are like, we're catching. They're coming to us. I mean, we'll see when people write their tell-all books. Obviously, you covered a lot of ground with the Prime Minister, so what else did you talk about?
Spent a lot of time, obviously, talking about Donald Trump and trade, specifically asked whether at that last meeting that he had with the president and the president of Mexico, President Sheinbaum, where they had that 45 minutes together in a holding room to talk about the future of CUSMA, whether the president had at that point said anything about getting out of the deal, ripping up the deal. The answer is no. In that conversation, they talked about sort of possible timelines forward for CUSMA, which I think would probably be reassuring for a lot of people. But it was also clear in that part of the conversation that this is tracking, as you and I both know, towards the review of CUSMA. It is no longer about getting rid of those sectoral tariffs, but in his mind, and you'll hear this in the interview, it's also about the United States making a decision around who is really their competition in the world. Is it China, or is it countries like Canada that you've come to depend upon? So we talk a little bit about that. We talk about the deal, the energy deal with Alberta, and why he still believes that people should think that he is committed to fighting climate change, why it still makes sense. A little bit about Stephen Guilbeault's departure, and then some more about leadership. He's been in the job now. Not
even a year.
Yeah, It's only been
Yeah,
just
I
over
know.
7 months.
I know.
This time last year, he was not in politics in any formal way. So sort of some of the ways he's approaching this job and whether he's found any of it surprising or challenging, I think it's fair to say that even for someone like Mr. Carney, who's come in with an enormous amount of experience, he does find the pace of things fairly relentless as he's trying to stay on top of a variety of different files and work with partners right around the world. So I think it gives you a little bit of insight. I know you've interviewed the Prime Minister before I did, so I know you've done this already, but it does give you a little bit of insight now, 7 months later, into how he's approaching this job and some of the big challenges.
Yeah, look, the pace of change, right, as you say, a year and 1 day ago, Chrystia Freeland resigned, in part because Justin Trudeau was trying to get Mark Carney to be the new finance minister, and I don't think he's ever going to do that job, Rosie, and here we are.
A year and 1 day ago, I had my question line for Justin Trudeau, and that year-ender, which never happened.
Yeah, a lot has changed in the last 366 days. All right, Rosie, thank you so much. Prime Minister Mark Carney is keeping his door wide open to more potential floor crossers. Speaking to our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, today, the Prime Minister says there are a spectrum of MPs who are attracted to his agenda, and they're all welcome to join the Liberal caucus.
Are you comfortable getting a majority government through people crossing the floor?
I am comfortable commanding the confidence of the House of Commons and getting through the House of Commons, getting support in the House of Commons and obviously votes and support in the House of Commons for legislation that is going to protect Canadian communities, that's going to build this country, is going to make our country more independent, more sustainable, more prosperous.
Okay, we're going to start there with the power panel. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And here with me in the studio, Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Jordan Leichnitz is a former NDP strategist. And Tonda McCharles is the Ottawa bureau chief for the Toronto Star. Tonda, that's a subtle wooing, about as subtle as a punch.
Confidence commander in chief.
What do you make of that? The door's open. There's a door jamb underneath it. The second door is being opened up.
I mean,
what do you think?
Open arms to all comers. And to the question, the substance of the question was, are you comfortable basically not having won an election, majority via an election, and scooping them up across the floor? Sure, he is. And why wouldn't he be? There's nothing that bars it. And so far, it's a successful ploy. And he's 1 seat shy of a majority. I don't know if he said it to Rosie, but he also told her French language counterpart, Patrice Roy, that he doesn't plan to trigger an election in the spring, though. He doesn't believe Canadians want an election. And he still believes we're in a crisis. So that's his job.
Supriya, what do you make of that? The Prime Minister saying there's a broad spectrum, we're open to people coming after, Tim Hodgson said lots of people are reaching out. Steve McKinnon says lots of people are reaching out. If they're trolling, they're also setting expectations of more to come, right? So how do you interpret what the Prime Minister had to say?
Yeah, I don't think he would have said that if there wasn't at least some sort of, palpable buzz going for them to believe that there are a few more MPs on those Conservative benches that are, disgruntled and are looking to cross the floor. Like, look, I agree with Tonda. I don't know why the Prime Minister would have issue of garnering a majority via a bunch of floor crossers. I think it's a pretty epic way to garner a majority. And I think the Prime Minister and his team should be really proud of what they've been able to accomplish in this era of, dysfunctional hyper partisanship with increasing affective polarization, right? Like the problem with Pierre Poilievre right now is that his instinct, for whatever reason, is to constantly blame Carney for backroom dealings instead of, if I were him, point out that these are somewhat spineless MPs who just a few months ago were more than willing to put their name down on a ballot under the Poilievre Conservative banner. Because in defense to Pierre Poilievre, he's the exact same guy he's been since he entered Parliament in 2004. Like, he's always been this adversarial of a character. So for folks claiming that, oh, well, now they have issue with his leadership style, it's like, where were you the last, 20-ish years that you've been watching him do his thing? So I don't know.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, that talking point from the Conservative leader about it's not a question of my leadership, it's the sneaky Mark Carney stuff, is like, in sports, you don't complain that the other coach is trying to beat you. You know what I mean? And continues to try to score on you. It's welcome to competition, right? But, what do you make of what the Prime Minister is saying there, that there's this broad spectrum and the door is open?
Well, just let me pick up on what Supriya was saying. I mean, the Pierre Poilievre is trying to make the argument, this is the wrong way to go about getting a majority, and they were elected under the Conservatives, and they knew what they were getting, and they stood for all of this. And fair enough as an argument. He's got to make some argument, but I don't think it's going to stick with the public, particularly if Mark Carney is able to have some more MPs migrate over, and all of a sudden there's a majority government. 3 years from now, I don't think anybody necessarily is going to remember whether or not somebody crossed the floor over that period of time, but we'll see. For Mark Carney, why wouldn't you troll? I mean, it's a target-rich environment for him at the moment. And again, he's probably also feeling that there isn't going to be this great outcry. Unlike Alberta, there aren't going to be recall orders brought forward on MPs who may cross the floor. And in certain parts of the country, in certain ridings, the Chris d'Entremont example may apply. If you believe the polling that has been done since d'Entremont crossed the floor, he's doing just fine. So why wouldn't you try that? And look, this whole notion, I just find it really rich. Today it's the Conservatives. Previously it's been the Liberals. Anybody remember Winston Churchill? He crossed the floor twice. Like, this stuff happens.
Well, he had to get something, and then he had to bring it back, right? I mean, is that...
Yeah, exactly.
Well, the Conservatives have done it too. The Conservatives have accepted Liberal floor
David
crossers.
Emerson, Stephen Harper.
Leona Alslip. We don't have to go all the way back to Harper's years. We can go just to recent Conservative history.
But she was leaving government to go to opposition, so slightly different vibe there.
It's a floor crosser.
Oh, look, yeah, it is. It just, context is a little bit different. I don't know. Jordan, in that interview, in addition to saying, doors open, come on in, the Prime Minister said they're not pitching, they're catching. That not his words, my description. That the Conservatives came to them, which is something the Conservatives are pushing back on. But they are scooping people up from battleground ridings too, right? Acadie-Annapolis and Markham Unionville. What do you make of what Carney said there?
So, I mean, I find it such a weird distinction to make. They're not pitching, I mean, of course these conversations are happening, right? And to the Conservative counterpoint, nobody cares, right? It's really about what the ultimate outcome is. But, I think it's so interesting because the Prime Minister was talking about the wide spectrum of interest that they're garnering. But actually, it's a pretty narrow spectrum, really. They're garnering interest from Conservatives who are in battleground ridings, some of whom, like in Annapolis Royal, would have had some difficulties potentially in their election, but you're not hearing any talk of New Democrats potentially crossing the floor.
Well, I'm just going to say,
as part of this.
Right? No, I've had at least one New Democrat name whispered in my ear, but I have nothing to say how serious it is. But it's been talked about.
I think though, what's interesting politically about this is that you're seeing the Liberals rather now forming a majority out of Conservatives.
Right.
They are building their majority out of Conservative MPs, and that's in a way because they're quite comfortable making that switch. A lot of the policies that Carney is putting forward are things that fit very nicely traditionally with the Conservatives, so it's not such a big gap. And a lot of those folks who ran, they didn't run to be in the backbench in the official opposition. They ran because they were going to form government, as was the case right up until Justin Trudeau quit. So there's definitely, I think, a mismatch of expectations for some of them.
The only thing I would say the Prime Minister does have to be careful about is the old Liberal trap, and Bob Rae used to talk about this, of triumphalism. Now, in the clip you played, he doesn't sound like he's going there, but certainly Pierre Poilievre, the other option he has is to point there and say, look, same old Liberal hubris and the like. If the Liberals are too celebratory, if they're too giddy in the way in which they're recruiting others, more of what the Poilievre is trying to sketch out in terms of same old Liberals will apply. The challenge Pierre Poilievre has had so far, because Mark Carney has not allowed him to do it, is to paint him as any old Liberal. So we're at a moment where Mark Carney may get his majority, but he's got to be careful with how he paints it so he doesn't create, for the Conservatives, opportunity. Pierre Poilievre wants that opportunity to be painted, but the bigger challenge comes is if somebody from the Conservatives does cross again, the dynamic in the Conservative Party is going to change.
Well,
to a degree over time.
No, I know, but like Ton already, it feels like there's a little bit of a, I don't know, there's something happening with the Conservatives right now because of all the instability, Tana. But if he does does build a majority out of Conservatives, the Prime Minister, he's kind of a progressive conservative, right, in his approach and style. So the Venn diagram of what he's interested in and what they might be interested in, it's a whole lot different than the overlap between Trudeau and Singh.
And it isn't, he's a different kind of progressive than,
Yeah.
say, Justin Trudeau was. Certainly, he's willing to accept Chris D'Entremont, who is not a pro-choice MP, into a Liberal caucus. That would not have been possible, at least in theory, under a Justin Trudeau Liberal caucus. Yes, Carney is looking like, to a lot of red Tories, like he's a progressive conservative, and to a lot of business Tories, as if he's pro-business and wants to get a pipeline built and all the other things. I think the bigger challenge, and a bit to what Tim just mentioned, look, there are big problems, I think, that Poilievre hasn't yet addressed ahead of a leadership review. And while I think many of us thought maybe some of this would be quelled at a leadership review, I'm not sure it is. I mean, Mr. Ma's crossing signaled that, he was completely unexpected, a surprise to everybody in this bubble here in Ottawa. His name was a surprise. We had heard other names.
Yeah,
so I think
he was never one of them.
Never one of them. And there is a minority of Conservative MPs sitting in caucus questioning Poilievre's leadership style and whether he learned any lessons from the last campaign. So I think, I'm starting to think that, no, the leadership review is not either the start or the end of his troubles. I think this is ongoing, and there may be caucus challenges he has to manage before and after.
Okay, Supriya, that dynamic that Tonda just laid out, it is 1 year and 1 day since Chrystia Freeland quit as a Deputy Prime Minister and Finance Minister, right? Because, it just slid under the radar. Happy Fezziversary. But how much it has changed things. And where Mr. Poilievre finds himself right now, losing 2 MPs to defection, facing the review, possibly another to resignation if Matt Jeneroux follows through. What's your sense of it, as someone who was on the inside a year ago, of where Mr. Poilievre finds himself compared to last December?
I mean, he's like watching a 6-year-old play basketball who's unable to pivot and just picks up the ball and travels all over. Like, dude, all he needs to do is pivot slightly, and he can't seem to do it. So I could certainly empathize with, if you are a newer MP or you are an MP who expected some sort of, grand lessons to be learned after, the Conservatives lost a 4th straight election to the Liberals, that there would at least be some soul searching, but that doesn't really seem to be the case. Now, I think a lot of Poilievre defenders will point out that, they have made inroads with a bunch of different demographics, and a record high Conservative, vote tally doesn't necessarily point to trouble for the party. But I would just say that the longer we're having these sorts of conversations, and the longer there's this air of, well, will there be more floor crossers or won't they? This is going to be hanging over his head. And until he's able to either quell the bleeding in terms of actual members bleeding over to the Liberals, or is able to present himself in at least, somewhat of a more sympathetic manner to people that are questioning his leadership style, the more he does these sorts of interviews where he's showing he's the exact same guy from 2004, it just reminds people why he blew a 20-point lead.
Right, but Tim, on that, look, we'll have conversations on shows like this all the time, right? But it's whether it's happening inside the Conservative ranks and inside the Conservative base, right? Outside of like jittery caucus members and people like that. I just wonder, the party is still at neck and neck with the Liberals in the polls, right? Mr. Poilievre expanded the Conservative coalition and made it younger. He has personal popularity problems with non-Conservative voters. There's no question about that. But given all of that success on his side of the electorate, you can understand the impulse to stay the course because you get the sense it could be a matter of time. I just don't know if that is real or not.
Well, that assumes that a lot of the variables that were in play stay the same as well, too. And that's a dangerous assumption. I mean, the whole Conservative campaign, arguably, in 2025 was predicated on running against Justin Trudeau. And to use his great basketball metaphor, there wasn't a pivot point. And continuing the sports metaphors, driving Tonda and Jordan both nuts, we've seen a lot of, Edmonton Oilers. Take Connor McDavid out. You can assign him.
On.
No.
with the hockey
current.
agent and the Oilers
Come on,
stuff.
they've gone to the Stanley Cup Finals twice. They've gone to Game 7s, but they couldn't do it because there's still a part that's not there. So it's great. It's great to get. The Conservatives rightly have celebrated. Yeah, we got silver, but if you don't know how to get to gold, you're going to be stuck at silver. And I think Mr. Poilievre is in this weird place at the moment where he is focused in January, as he should be, and he knows the gold in January comes from being as he is. But to actually win an election, you have to think there's an addition to his game or two additions to his game that are necessary. Break the sports metaphor.
No, Jordan has a sports analogy. She's going to drop,
entirely.
right?
Like, it's a math problem at the end of the day.
Thank you.
For Poilievre,
Thank you.
right?
Leave it to the New Democrat to make it about school. No, go ahead.
But math, yeah. And look, the New Democrats are part of that
squared
math.
plus B squared? No, okay.
So the result that the Conservatives were able to get in the last election was predicated on a collapse of the NDP vote that was orchestrated in part by their negative advertising, right? And the particular conditions flowing out of the confidence and supply agreement that the Liberals and Conservatives had. Those conditions don't necessarily exist in the next election. There's going to be a new leader. There may be so that would be important for the Conservatives to see some growth in the New Democrat vote share if they wanted to have a shot there. And of course, the other question that's very important for Poilievre is not whether or not he just appeals to party members and the base and the people who are going to turn up to the convention. It's who he can grow with in the potential vote universe of the Conservative Party. And I think what we're seeing from the numbers, and particularly his leadership numbers as they've developed after the election, where they have deteriorated steadily since April, is that among the voters that he would be most likely to need to win over in order to make those gains, in order to potentially win a general election, he's actually becoming less likable and less popular.
And I would just add to that, I mean, the growth trajectory, I mean, shockingly, he has a problem also adding support from provincial premiers, because right now he's out there seemingly in opposition to a deal that Carney's crafted with Alberta's premier on promoting pipelines. And instead he's playing, political strategy games in the House of Commons to poke holes in it. But there are a lot of Conservatives in Alberta that believe that deal is a good one that Carney has struck. And I hear that Daniel Smith is not too happy with Pierre Poilievre out-slamming it. So he already is at odds with Doug Ford, the most successful Conservative premier in the country, Tim Houston, Nova Scotia. He can't afford to start irritating and annoying Conservative allies in the West.
Well, Smith has done a couple of interviews, and she's resisted the opportunities and the invitations to engage with Mr. Poilievre.
In public, of course.
Right, but because she doesn't need that smoke right now with everything she's dealing with internally.
But there is still a schism that has deepened between Western and Eastern Conservatives that Mr. Poilievre seems to be incapable of bridging.
That's my point.
Absolutely. No, I think you're dead right. And Tim Houston in Nova Scotia, the other Conservative premier in the last election, Cypria, a place where they had room to grow, and now they don't have a single seat with Mr. d'Entremont crossing the floor, right? So, when you, at the height of your power, don't build your alliances and consolidate your gains, you end up in this kind of a situation. So I just wonder, as a final point before we switch topics, he's raised the floor of the party? Has he also lowered the ceiling of the party? Like, there's this narrow band that he can play in right now, and I don't know if it's enough to get to the Prime Minister's job.
Yeah, I think that's a really good insight. And I mean, look, had you told me a few years ago that the Conservative Party would have gotten 40% and still would have lost the election, I would have been like, what are you smoking? No, that doesn't make sense math-wise, to Jordan's point about this being about math. But clearly that was the case. And so I think, moving forward, if he's incapable of pivoting, okay, let's say that's off the table, he's just going to be the same 2004 guy that he's always been, then he's got to be able to tap into something. Maybe it's not a pivot. Maybe it's the anger that's felt by the under 40s in this country who are priced out of housing and who are now looking at, another economic uncertain situation. Like, if you're a millennial, you've now lived through a couple of these. None of them are great. And so I think there is room to maneuver here. But ultimately, what this comes down to is people don't like voting for a jerk. And if you look like you're a jerk, and you're a jerk even to those who are supposed to be allies with you or, to your cause or whatever, then that tends to turn regular people off.
Biggest reason I've never gotten into politics, Tim. People don't like for a joke. Look, I got the humility thing down. I'm great at humility.
Yes, you're well known for
I'm
your
the best at it.
humility.
Everyone says it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's it, Aaron. Like, share, subscribe. I really would appreciate your subscription. We're not going to try to sell you anything here. I'm not going to try to sell you a stupid sticker. Let's just learn about Canadian federal politics. That's it. Let's save our country. There's still time left. That's it. Thank you all very much for watching. We'll catch you in the next video. Again, I appreciate everybody that does subscribe and just watching the video. Share this with somebody if you really enjoyed it. We'll catch you in the next one. Ciao for now.